Well, the world has sure gone nutty, muddy, buddy, even downright cruddy, muddy, buddy. Wish I missed the past, buddy, buddy, but there's still Buddycast. No, don't be nutty, go meet a buddy here on Buddycast.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder and host of Buddycast, Nick Sorensen.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to everybody's favorite show, Buddycast. I'm your host, Nick Sorensen. Thank you for joining us. I know it's cold out there. I know it's, especially if you're in the eastern part of the United States, it's very freezing. But, it's always a warm, fun time here on Buddycast. And I've got a new buddy with me. I've got my buddy, Tom. How you doing, Tom?
I'm fine, thank you, Nick. Thank you for having me on Buddycast.
Absolutely. Honored to have you. So, Tom, first I got to ask, you were on the Tom Cridland agency. Can you tell me about that?
I can indeed. I started the Tom Cridland agency in 2015 when I was getting press with my clothing brand, which is still going, Tom Cridland Clothing. And we're best known for the 30-year sweatshirt and the 30-year t-shirt, which are, they are what they say they are on the tin. They're garments with a 30-year guarantee. So anyway, we were getting in the newspapers a lot, and we were approached by Henry Poole, who are the oldest tailor on Savile Row, about doing their PR and their marketing because we were doing a good job at Tom Cridland Clothing's PR. One thing led to another, and I ended up starting an agency specializing in marketing and public relations. And I'm very happy to say that we've worked with over 300 clients so far since 2015. And it's just been a wonderful journey. Nice. Yeah, that's in a nutshell, that's the Tom Cridland agency.
Nice. Are you able to give us a little insight on some of those clients?
Yeah, well, you can look up on tomcridland.com a full rundown of clients. But one client that I'm very excited to be working with at the moment, or rather not necessarily a full rundown, but we highlight about 30 or 40 different people. But one client we're very excited to be working with at the moment are the legendary Stylistics, the band from Philadelphia. Famous for songs like You Are Everything or You Make Me Feel Brand New. And we're working with them on booking dates, concerts in territories such as the Middle East, Europe, essentially anywhere that's not the UK market and the US market, which their manager, Jack Bart, who was also James Brown's manager, he's been handling that for 40 years, but Jack and I are good friends. So I'm very happy to be now working through the Tom Cridland agency with the Stylistics. So that's a recent example of something that's very close to my heart. Henry Poole, our first ever client, is still with us. I was at Henry Poole on Savile Row last week. And one client that I always like to, I guess boast about is Rubik's Cube, because that was a real honor to do their PR and marketing. It was a few years ago now. It was about 4 or 5 years ago. But we were approached by Rubik's Cube, and we were doing their marketing and PR for a couple of years. And so, for somebody who started businesses at their kitchen table, in my parents' back bedroom, it's a dream come true to be approached by brands like that to work on marketing.
Most definitely. And you touched on it earlier. You've got a clothing line. Can you tell me about that clothing line?
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, all the garments that we're most famous for, 30-year t-shirt, 30-year sweatshirt, they're sustainable fashion in the sense that we're encouraging you, the consumer, to keep your clothing for longer by giving you a 30-year guarantee. So if anything happens during the next 30 years to your sweatshirt or t-shirt, we'll repair it or we'll even replace it. But the main thing is that you are buying a great quality item of clothing, a wardrobe staple, and that you want to keep it for a long time, because people are constantly changing their wardrobes, buying very tatty clothing, throwing it in the bin, wearing it once, sometimes not even wearing it. So it's kind of an antithesis to that fast fashion attitude. And the 30-year clothing side of things is what made my brand take off, alongside our relationship with Nigel Olsson, who's been Elton John's drummer since 1969. And we've been working with him for 10 years now, making Nigel's clothing. You know, he wore a purple Tom Cridland clothing suit at Glastonbury recently, which is a big highlight for our clothing brand to have made that. And we were at Glastonbury watching him in our gear. So that was incredible. So yeah, I mean, the clothing is still available at tomcridland.com. And yeah, it's really the first entrepreneurial thing I did. It, to be honest, it's the first hard work I more or less did since I was much younger, because I was a terrible student in my teens, and I scraped good grades. And you know, it was when I started Tom Cridland Clothing that I learned the value of hard work.
Absolutely. And speaking of hard work, you also work hard on your podcast, The Greatest Music of All Time. Tell us about the podcast.
Well, the podcast was a sobriety project. I started recording episodes in 2019 and released the first episodes just actually as the pandemic hit in March of 2020, April of 2020, around that time. And the format is very simple. It's kind of like Desert Island Discs. Other than, if you're a musician, you don't necessarily need to tell us your favorite albums, but you certainly are required to tell us what your favorite music, you know, what music means the most to you. And if you're a musician, then obviously, you know, the whole interview is about music mostly, and your career and your life. If you're not from music, you tell us about your favorite albums or songs or artists, much like Desert Island Discs. And we've been lucky enough to have some incredible guests on this podcast. The first ever guest was Chris Rea, and then we had people like Smokey Robinson, Johnny Marr, Verdine and Philip Bailey from Earth, Wind and Fire, Chance the Rapper, David Guetta, David Crosby. You know, it's just a passion project in the sense that I started it so that I could meet my heroes, and I got lucky by calling it Greatest Music of All Time and buying greatestmusicofalltime.com. And I'd had a bit of experience writing articles about music that people liked, and it's snowballed now into having over 400 episodes. And it's just a privilege to speak to people like that and get an opportunity to meet them, and you know, and sometimes meet them backstage or at their houses or at their recording studios. So it's a really wonderful thing.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people ask me this question, so I'm going to ask you this. How do you find the notable guests? Like, what's your approach to them?
Well, the first guest, as I said, was Chris Rea, and he was kind of sold on the greatest, or his management rather, was sold on being part of the Greatest Music of All Time podcast, and the idea that we were celebrating him as one of the greatest. And a lot of the people initially, we were celebrating as the greatest, and then we expanded to this kind of Desert Island Discs format as well, so that we could get guests who aren't necessarily musicians themselves, people like Christina Hendricks from Mad Men. You know, that was just a chance for her to talk about music. But the first pitch was, you're one of the greatest of all time. Would you like to come on the Greatest of All Time podcast? And I'm amazed to say that pitch worked, because, you know, it's not like I was necessarily expecting it to work. I hoped it would work. I hope I'd get a chance to speak to my heroes, but it was a shot in the dark, really.
Nice. And you mentioned, you know, you've worked with Nigel Olsson. Has he been on the podcast?
He has been on the podcast. I always try to advertise the episode with Nigel a lot because he's a good friend. We put it, we give it a lot of you know, airtime, and we put it front and center whenever we're talking about the podcast in blurbs or anything like that. And yeah, it's a great episode with him.
Wonderful. Any other, as an Elton fan, I got to ask, any other Elton John band members that have been on the show?
Oh, well, we've had Davey has been on the show. Davey Johnstone has been on the show 4 times. John Mahon's been on.
Yep.
Gary Osborne, Elton's other lyricist, not Bernie, sadly yet. But so, you know, we're missing. Obviously, we can't get Dee on because he passed away. So we could get Ray Cooper, or we could get Elton and Bernie, or maybe Matt Bissonette and Kim Bullard. So you know, there's still room for some more Elton podcasts.
Absolutely. I asked that because one, John Mahon was also on this show. He was a really good interview.
He was
Two,
on.
just
He was
as
on
a
your show.
yep,
That's
yep, he's a
fantastic.
buddy. Yep,
That's fantastic.
yep. hmm
And
And honestly, it was
when
just
did he come on your show?
he's been on twice. He came on during COVID, obviously, like he back when like the shows weren't going on and all that. But it was like 2021, and then he came on in December of 22, right before shows started up again. So
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah,
And
and he's been.
how did you turning the interview back on you? How did you get him on? Did you just reach out to him?
It was honestly just reaching out on Facebook and just taking a shot and saying, here's what I got to offer. Would you like to be a part of this and talk about your adventures? And he was the first to jump and say, absolutely. So,
Oh, that's brilliant.
and he's a really good buddy. Still, we still kind of keep in touch a little bit to this day, but he's a fantastic, but like he's the definition of a buddy,
That's awesome. Yeah, he's a very nice person, John.
Yes, and apparently he grew up really close to my hometown. So he's only like the next state over.
Ohio. He's from Ohio, right?
Yep, and I'm from Pennsylvania, so literally we share a border.
Yeah.
Yep. So speaking of Elton John, you do a little Elton tribute yourself.
Yes, yeah, I've been doing that for a couple of years now, or I guess it's been a couple of years, and I really enjoy playing that music. It's a privilege and an honor to play it.
Now I got to ask, what are some of your favorite songs?
I would say my favorite song is, I guess that's why they call it the blues, because I like the way that Elton changes that up and varies it, and it doesn't sound exactly like the record, and there's always a new bluesy lick that he's throwing in or a new melody, and so it's a great song in terms of the improvisation from the live perspective, but also it's just such a beautiful progression and lyric and everything.
What about your favorite song to play?
I love playing, I guess that's why they call it the blues too. I mean, obviously Funeral for a Friend, Love Lies Bleeding is sort of I would say the masterpiece of the Elton John catalogue, and it's satisfying to play that one live, particularly in a three-piece, if slightly nerve-wracking, considering I've only been playing piano for a short time in the grand scheme of things, certainly shorter than my bandmates have been playing their instruments. So that's one where I'm hanging on for dear life. Funeral for a Friend, Love Lies Bleeding.
Nice. Tell us a little bit about your band.
Well, I've got a drummer called Harry, and he sings brilliantly as well, just like Nigel. And then Justin is on bass and vocals, and he is kind of like, also has that Davy Johnstone side of things in terms of he's a bit of a musical director and technical director, and he is very crucial in terms of making sure that we're set up gear wise and in terms of audio engineering and that side of things. He's really wonderful.
Nice. Now I got to go back to the beginning and ask, what sparked your interest in music? Take me down your musical journey.
Well, I grew up on the Beatles, so I was just obsessed with the Beatles from when I was 5, and then I got into all sorts of stuff. I grew up in when I was like between 5 and 15, 16. It was still CDs were a thing. People started illegally downloading music maybe, but the radio was still important. We weren't so overwhelmed and inundated with stuff. It was more difficult to get your hands on an album. You gave an album repeated spins. So I was Beatle obsessed. I wanted Beatles albums. I wanted Beatles documentaries. And then, things that people in my year at school were listening to occasionally piqued my interest, but never in the same way. The Beatles felt like very deep, and then things like Robbie Williams or Eminem or whatever people were listening to when I was like 10 years old because they were in the charts, that felt like a kind of guilty pleasure. And so and then I started discovering things like at university, obviously Elton's music in greater detail, country and western artists like Ronnie Milsap. I've always loved the Bee Gees and the Beach Boys. The the Eagles, I've seen them many times. Earth, Wind and Fire, lots of soul music, Philadelphia soul music, like the Stylistics, of course. So I'm lucky enough to work with, and I'm going on tour with them later this year.
Ooh.
You know, I basically like Elton, and at this point I like Elton and I like soul music. And I used to kind of be slightly into that kind of cock rock, Survivor and Def Leppard, and I mean I still love Def Leppard, but you know, Europe and Foreigner and all that stuff. I mean, I like a bit of everything as long as it's got instrumentation and melody and meaning and integrity behind it. And I'm not much of a fan of top 40 radio in its current state. You know, my rap days, I feel like they're behind me. Not that I had rap days per se, but
Yep. Have you gotten to meet any of your heroes? Like you mentioned Elton a lot. You mentioned, you know, the Beatles. Have you met anyone like Paul McCartney yet? Anything like that?
well, I met Elton last year in March at his Oscars party, and that was very nice. If a brief encounter, but he was very friendly. I would love to meet Paul McCartney. Hopefully, I'll manage to meet him this year. And you know, Ringo, but I've not managed to meet any of the two living Beatles yet.
Now, you know, I got to ask what it was like meeting Elton.
Yeah, well, it was nerve-wracking, and it was great, and you know, it was like it was a bucket list moment, but at the same time, it's kind of, unless you can sit down with someone like that for half an hour and do an interview with them, the amount you get out of a small encounter like that is minimal. It was nice to cross it off the bucket list and get a photo and have a brief conversation. But in all honesty, I've gotten more out of my interactions with Nigel and Davey because they've been more meaningful.
Now, let me ask that. How'd you meet those guys?
Well, Nigel, you know, similar to you in that, you know, if you don't reach out, you'll never know. But
Exactly.
I reached out to him, and his I think management put me in touch with him. But it was all through the clothing business. You know, I had clothing that I wanted him to check out, and wondered whether he'd like to work together on that. So it started off as a professional thing, and then it morphed more into a friendship. And you know, he was at mine and Deborah's wedding, and he read a reading, and you know, we've seen a lot of him. He's a good man.
Wonderful. By the way, do you know our buddy here? You can't see his name, but do you know our buddy Paul Smith?
I do. Is that Paul?
Yep.
Paul is an absolute hero.
He is wonderful. He's my vinyl supplier. That's all I can say.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. You're a man of taste. I was actually just messaging Paul because he's been kind enough to send me some photos and videos from the Elton tribute gig, the Rocket Man Experience, Tom's Elton tribute gig that we did in Portugal. And Paul was very kind enough to come and see us play there, and shared photos on Elton John Online, which of course is the only Elton John group worth checking out, in my opinion. I mean, I only go on Elton John Online, and I go on the Rocket Club, which I think is the official one run by Furnish and Rocket Music. But that's it.
That is awesome. And you're right, it is a fantastic Facebook group there. It's nothing but kindness. It's nothing but awesome. There's no spam or anything like that. He does a good job moderating it.
Yeah. He does a fantastic job at connecting fans, and yeah, he's been very supportive to Deborah and I. Yeah, we're big fans of Paul Smith.
That's wonderful. A little shout out to our buddy Paul there. Now, another question I wanted to ask you. You yourself have a book out there called $1 Million Addict. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, well, I wrote that when Deborah and I were in India last year, and it's available on tomcridland.com again. Just like pretty much everything seems to be available there, if you ask me. Yeah, it's just an account of how I got sober and how I started my businesses. You know, my clothing business, my agency, my Greatest Music of All Time podcast, and my music career, which is obviously predominantly now focused on the Rocket Man experience and playing Elton's music, but how I learned piano during lockdown and how I got that off the ground, and how I've managed to find happiness in sobriety. But and there've been some unbelievable people that I've met, and also some unbelievable low points through my drinking, nearly drinking myself to death, being in all sorts of danger, in financial difficulty, in just general ridiculous situations. And I thought it would be good to get all of it down into a book, because it's just a crazy story. So that's why that's why I wrote $1 Million Addict. But I've not been promoting it too much. It's been a bit on the back burner because there's been a couple of things I need to finish before we start distributing it through places like Amazon. But yesterday there was a big article in The Guardian about $1 Million Addict and about me meeting Elton and getting sober, and so we've had a lot of interest in the book and a lot of orders yesterday. So Paul, it is my absolute pleasure that we've been mentioning you.
This is from him as well. I know you can't see him, but
I'm gonna blush, Paul.
But it sounds like a fantastic book, talking about your journey, everything like that, especially from someone who's looking to write a book himself. So
what's your book going to be about, Nick? And also, would you like a copy of $1 Million Addict? Because we can get you one sent out.
Absolutely.
If you shoot me your address.
Absolutely, I'll do that right after the show. But my book would probably be my autobiography. I don't know if you can tell, I'm a little person. I have a form of dwarfism called hypochondroplasia, and it would just be about my life, kind of looking up, from dealing with bullying, dealing with, just all my perspective, basically, and just talking about the adventures I had, such as getting married, starting this podcast, just being, just being me.
Remarkably. And I mean, well, it seems like you've been through stuff that I can't imagine. So, yeah. Well, please keep me updated on your book as you're writing it.
Will do, and I'll send. If I ever get it out there, I will definitely send you a copy as well.
That would be that would be fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Now, buddy, I got 2 more questions for you. One of them I'm going to dissect into pieces, but before I get to that one, this is a question that my buddy Jonas Kane always asks. He wants to know, in your own words, what does it mean to be someone's buddy?
It's a very good question. To be someone's buddy means so many things. To be a good friend, you have to be loyal. You have to, be generous. You have to care deeply about your friend, about your buddy. You have to be comfortable being in the same room. You've got to be able to be yourself, say what you think, have no fear of saying what you think. You've got to want to see them. It's give and take. You expect a good buddy to reach out to you and you to reach out to them, want to see each other, and just genuinely love their company. They're good friends and good conversations with good friends can be so much more rewarding than any material or professional or career, success. A good buddy is just a good person who you want to spend time with and who you want to stay in touch with. Paul, a good buddy is Paul Smith.
Yes, 100%. He's always good, but Paul is the definition of a buddy, because I know we're basically promoting him now this episode, but he's basically the buddy that, hey, Paul, I'm looking for this album. I'm looking for this. I'm looking for that. Can you help me? Right away. Here you go. Right away. I can get you a copy by next Friday, if that works. So he's a fantastic buddy. And now he's blushing. So. Alrighty. Buddy, we've come to what's called the ultimate Buddycast buddy question. You ready for this one?
I am, yeah. Far away.
Awesome. I'm going to break this into different pieces because you're a man of many talents. The first one I wanted to ask you, I didn't email you this question, but it came to my mind. You talked about dealing with and addiction, dealing with alcoholism. For anyone out there who's struggling through that now, who's going through that sort of thing, what's your advice to them?
I would say the same as what I believe Elton says, which is to ask for help. I mean, I just did it, taking it one day at a time, and then I was like, oh, I'm no longer finding everything so difficult, and then I got addicted to that. But in general, people can the main thing is that you actually want to get better, and if you've got that, if that's already half the battle. I think if you want to get better, then you're happy to ask for help, whether it's AA or counseling or anything like that. Recovery programs. If you ask for help, then that's just going to make your life so much easier.
Mm-hmm. So utilize those resources out there.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I was lucky enough to stay sober and get sober just by taking it one day at a time and not getting any help. But maybe I should have. I'd never advise people to just take that approach.
Mm-hmm. What about your advice for anyone out there who wants to become a musician?
I would say what David Crosby told me, which is do not do it unless you absolutely have to, because it's a very difficult industry, the music industry. You have, unless you want a life of guaranteed financial hardship and bitterness, then think very carefully. I mean, I'm lucky to say I feel we're in a very lucky position with the Rocket Man experience, and some other stuff that I'm doing and working with the stylistics and the podcast to have carved out something that I'm very proud of. But make no mistake that it's come with some really horrendous stuff along the way. And I'm very lucky to have my wife Deborah looking after me and helping, and I feel like if I wasn't so blessed, I may have not been able to just kind of ride it to this stage where it's actually where I'm reaping the benefit of it. And I know a lot of people personally who have had really frustrating, horrible experiences and who remain pretty miserable with the music industry. You've got to really love it, and being talented in and of itself won't do all the work for you. You have to do more than just be good at singing and playing. You have to bring something else to the table. Don't just expect people to want to pay you large sums of money to play your instrument.
Solid advice. Solid. My final question for you is one more advice question, which would be from one podcaster to another for anyone out there looking to start their own show, their own podcast. What is your advice to them?
Well, I mean, I would say if they're watching this, without wanting to, blow too much smoke up your ass, so to speak, that you've asked some very good questions here. You've been very easy to talk to. And so, that's just making the person that you're interviewing feel at home and like, you've taken an interest in that. That's, that basically do what Nick's done here, and then you'll have no problem.
Aw, thanks, buddy.
My pleasure. Well, it's an honor to be on the Buddycast, and that's that's really the podcast that people should, or one of many brilliant podcasts that people should take as an example as to how to conduct an interview. It's just a good conversation between people where you find out interesting stuff, and hopefully stuff that might be of some use to people, might be of some inspiration.
And now you got me blushing. First you got Paul blushing. Now you got me blushing. So that is awesome. That is awesome. A few more comments from my buddy Paul. So, but Tom, thank you for being a buddy on Buddycast. Number one, you're not a guest on the show. You're a buddy. You're an official buddy on Buddycast. So
that's a real honor.
Yep. As a buddy, you are welcome back anytime. Just know that anything you got to promote, anything you want to talk about, you know where to find us.
Oh, thank you very much, Nick. Thank you for reaching out and for bearing with me on the timings and everything. And I hope your wife gets back okay.
Thank you. And before we close out this episode, I have a favor to ask you that I ask all my buddies. Number one, stick around for a minute. We'll chat for a minute afterwards. But before we close out this episode, I have to ask you, whatever you're going to do today, tomorrow, next week, next month, or even next year, promise me you're going to go out and you're going to go be someone's buddy.
Oh, that's guaranteed. That's guaranteed for sure.
We have it.
I'll
There
be
we have it.
Paul's
A buddy
buddy.
guarantee. We have a buddy
Okay.
guarantee. For all my buddies out there, this is my buddy, Tom Cridland. Please check out all his stuff. You can find it on tomcridland.com. I'm your host, Nick Sorensen. Thank you for joining us on another episode of everybody's favorite show.
Well, the days are going fast, buddy, we've got to make them last, buddy, before they've all gone past, buddy, tune in to Buddycast. But don't feel like it could make it, buddy, here on Buddycast.